And this is a type of fear that is, it's a stone cold fear which makes you immovable, and it's like you're not breathing for this entire time because you don't know. You know, as soon as you hear anything or see anything, it's already too late. You can't react anymore.
Is being curious a good quality? Even if you decide to travel to a war zone as a young woman to interview soldiers on the front line, just because you're curious? And how much of our lives make sense looking at it from hindsight? In today's episode, I'm talking to Verena Gruber-Sytchev, who left for the front lines of Kurdistan at the age of 23. We talk about going to places where few others dare to go and what we can learn from crises. This podcast brings you stories from and about people who stepped into the unknown, stories about fear, uncertainty, the illusion of security, or, I don't know, let's see what it will be about. My name is Katarina Bayer, and I will host you on this journey into the unknown. You have been in Kurdistan from August till December 2014, and you did research about this place about 6 years. Kurdistan is a mountainous region straddling the borders of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, and Armenia. It is a place that I had to Google to know its whereabouts. When did you first hear about this region, and why did you decide to travel there?
Well, that's actually quite a story, how I first heard about this region. I got into the master's class in Lund University in Sweden, and it was a center of Middle Eastern studies. There we were 30 people from 22 different nationalities, and obviously, so the first question you ask anybody is, where do you come from? And one person answered, I come from Kurdistan. And so I went through my head all the stans I know, like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and so forth, and so forth. And I finally concluded I have no idea where Kurdistan is. And so I got really intrigued with it, and this is how I first heard about it. Why I traveled there, that's an entirely different story, although it connects to this one. Because this colleague at the university was from there, I was very intrigued with it, and I wanted to learn more about it. It also happened that we lived in the same corner of Lund, so we walked to other classes together because we had the same schedule. And every time we talked, the more he was telling me, the less I understood about this region, because a lot of the things he was telling me about the place he came from, which he calls Kurdistan, others call the Kurdish region of Iraq, others call it Bashur, which is the southern region of the greater Kurdistan area. So it has a lot of names, and it just contradicted everything that I have ever learned about what a state is supposed to be and what statehood is and what are the boundaries of it and what is not a state. And it just confused me all the way. So the obvious answer to what you do if something confuses you and intrigues you at the same time as an academic, right, is that you write a paper about it. And this is exactly what I did. I wrote a paper on taking international law and political theory on statehood, and I tried to figure out what this region is. And at the end of it, I was quite satisfied with my paper, but I realized that, well, theory is all fair and square, but I still have no idea what this actually would look like, what this would feel like, how this would be like.
To summarize it for me, and you tell me if I got you correct, you first didn't know that the state is actually existing. Then you heard things that were so intriguing because you didn't make any sense with it. So you thought you go there, make research, and now that you've been there for quite a long time and you did research, you still cannot make a really sense out of it.
Well, you can make sense out of it now, but it still doesn't fit into into any box which we have ever created in terms of, academic definition of what is a state and what is not. So, but I find actually that this is also the beauty of the region, and this is what kept me interested for so long.
So you traveled to Kurdistan in 2014. You were 23 years old back then.
Yeah, actually, you made me aware of that.
When I think about how I was with 23, I see a, let's say, very ambitious but not very self-assessed person. And I didn't have a lot of knowledge about larger issues. Even I traveled some countries in the world. So I was wondering, where did this drive to face the unknown come from?
That's a really funny question. I actually have this story in my head, which my mom told me, that apparently when I was 3 years old, I was walking around back then at a wedding, and the grandmother of a friend came up to me and she was like, "Where are you going and what are you doing?" And my answer apparently was, "I'm 3 years old, thank you very much, I can take care of myself." So if that was my attitude at 3, I'm guessing that by 23 I was, more than happy to take care of myself and to do what I wanted to do. But in any case, I've traveled a lot. I was fortunate to travel a lot with my parents when I was young, and I did Interrail when I was 17. Back then with a friend. I also traveled the world for half a year by myself when I was 19. So I guess by the time I went to Kurdistan at, as you said, 23, I didn't even think about it. It was a place that I wanted to see and to discover, and I trusted in all the abilities I've learned from previous travels to also figure out my way there. And as for why was I interested in the unknown, I always have been, as long as I can remember. So that was nothing new there. That was just another step in the same direction.
For all the people who don't know what Kurdistan is or where Kurdistan is, thanks, I also didn't know about it. Kurdistan is famous for something. It's famous for fighting for its recognition and independence, and maybe most known for its effort against fighting ISIS. So the research that you did while being in Iraqi Kurdistan is because this region has no unified military. So several different parties of military, which all call themselves Peshmerga, are not fighting alongside. You worked on the question on how to unify these forces. During your research, you talked to politicians, you told me, to the military, and even joined the army on the front line. Did you know when you first came to Kurdistan what you're getting into?
No, not at all. There was nothing like that even on the horizon. When I landed in Kurdistan, it was, I think, a day or two before ISIS took over Mosul. So I landed in a region which, as I said, I was simply curious to get to know, to feel, rather than to just read about. I wanted to see how it feels to land somewhere without knowing that I'm in Iraq officially, but then landing in an airport where I don't need an Iraqi visa, and how that would be. The most unsecured day was probably the first. I have to say, I landed at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was dark. My mother insisted like crazy that I get a hotel beforehand and that I have a car pick me up there. And I'm glad that she insisted on it. It was really worth it. And then I remember that getting to the hotel and all of that was all right. And at the end of the day, we often think of these places as so far away and really weird. But in the end, the city is a city. No matter where you go in the world, and there is a certain infrastructure you can rely on. Sure, you need to be more careful here and there on certain issues, but the city is a city in terms of infrastructure. And so it was easy to land. It was easy to get the visa. It was easy to get get a car, and it was easy to get to the hotel. But I remember waking up the first morning and looking out of my window and looking out into this city where I've just arrived, and I remember feeling scared and anxious because I realized that the biggest hurdle for me now was to actually leave the hotel room, because in the hotel room I felt kind of safe. And then I knew that I couldn't spend 2 weeks in the hotel room. So I was like, okay, I got to go out there. I got to do something. And the only thing I could Google on my phone where there would be any place to go in Erbil was the bazaar. So in the big market in the center of the city, and the citadel, which is several thousand years old in the center in the heart of the city. So I asked the concierge to call me a cab, and I simply said to the bazaar, and he took me there and he let me out. And then I was standing there all by myself in a place where I don't speak the language, where I've never been before, where I don't know anybody. And I was like, yeah, so great. What do I do now? To be fair, I have quick correction. I did have one contact, which I was provided with by a professor of mine in Sweden. She was a former student at the same university. She was an American, and she was there at the time. The problem I was facing is that my phone had no connection, none. It couldn't connect to the phone providers in Kurdistan. Later on, that went better, but by 2014. It just didn't get any signal. I couldn't do anything without an actual phone. And so my challenge was to be able to, find my way and find a way to communicate with getting an Iraqi phone or something like that, or a Kurdish phone to be correct. And so I was simply standing there and I was looking around, and there were so many people and everybody was looking at me because obviously I have long red hair, white skin. I stand out, like not just white, but like porcelain white. So I really stand out. And my point back then was simply like, okay, I can stand here and panic, or I can try to hide, or I can simply try to figure out who I could possibly talk to. And I saw a white face all across the bazaar, and I looked at him and I was like, okay, he's British. And he actually turned out to be. So I walked up straight to him and I said, hi, it's my first day in Kurdistan. I'm sorry that I just approached you like this, but I'm a bit lost. Can you help me? And he did. He's still a good friend of mine today, and to this day, he has spent years and years in Kurdistan. He spoke Kurdish fluently. He helped me to get a phone. He invited me to meet some friends later in the evening at the bar. Turns out he also knew the American girl, which I already had the contact of. And so it was through that really easy to get in touch with the expat community there. And through that, I also made my first friends among the Kurds, because they were there they were around and we connected. And it was particularly easy with all those Kurds who spoke English fluently as well. Some of them even spoke Swedish or German even, because there are a lot of expats as well, and they come and go, and there's a big diaspora among the Kurds, and so they speak many languages most of the time.
But that means when you first came to Kurdistan, you didn't plan to stay there for research, you just came out of curiosity, or you already had plans to do research there?
I already had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to do my master's thesis on it, and my first proposition on the topic of the thesis was... I was told that's a PhD topic, not a master's topic. And I was like, damn, yet again, my topics are too big, or I think too big, or the issues I'm interested in are too complex for what I need to do. And so I tried to break it down. And the thing I was interested in were the political tensions among the Kurds, because what really intrigues me is that you have this region which really doesn't fit in terms of statehood. But at the same time, this region in itself is so divided among the political parties, and even regionally divided. So it's really... That was something where I really wondered, how would you get those two together? And back then I met a Kurd in Lund who also told me that the issue of the Peshmerga would be something which is a key question in terms of bringing them together sustainably. And so I've heard about the Peshmerga. I knew that this was an issue to look at the military, but back then I thought to look more at the political parties. And as I just described, my first day there, which ended with having a beer in a lovely garden with, several expats and several Kurds, and really finding my first connections. The next day, or was it the day after, I can't recall, but it was quickly after that where ISIS took over Mosul, and suddenly I was like, okay, so something is going on there now, and the market changed quickly. You saw people, joining the armed forces. It was quite visible that they were recruiting, and you could really feel that a lot of movement was going on. A lot of international companies, advisors pulled out of the region. The only ones who stayed were freelance journalists, military forces, and a lot of NGOs. But the oil companies drew out really quickly, and there was a lot of movement back then there. And suddenly I found myself, in an area of active war, and that was unforeseen.
But that means for the first time that you stayed, you just stayed several weeks.
I stayed for 2 weeks because this was the like, you don't need a long stay permit. You just get a stamp on your passport and you can stay for 2 weeks with no issues in Kurdistan. This is why I stayed there for 2 weeks. But and originally it was really just to get to know the region. Yet when this whole thing happened, and when I also realized, okay, I feel safe enough in this region, and I feel that this would really be an interesting topic to research for my master's, I was confirmed that this is the topic for me while I was there, and hence I returned. I returned briefly afterwards, and then I stayed for several months.
So when did you come back then? This was in August 2014. And then you stayed for several months.
Yes.
And how many times have you been to Kurdistan since then?
I actually didn't count, so I couldn't tell you. But since this since this several months that I stayed there, it was rather always on an in and out basis. So it was 2 weeks here, 1.5 weeks there, something like that. Yeah. But several times, like 5, 6, 7.
You know what I was wondering? I mean, I, of course, checked what Peshmerga means. And Peshmerga means facing the death or in front of death. And a friend of me who comes from Iran said even they used the word before as food pre-taster. So the ones who were pre-tasting the food for like a king or a queen.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
You come for 2 weeks, like a holiday excursion to
Kind of.
Kurdistan, a place that you don't know, and you get intrigued by people who call themselves in front of death. You don't know anybody, and then you decide to write a master's thesis about. So I can totally understand that, but then my question is, how did you get to know people you can interview, where you can do research on, and was there not somebody thinking that you should do something suspicious, or they didn't want to talk with you, or...
I did not face any suspicion, to be honest. And it was surprisingly easy to make contacts. As I described, it all started with this first evening at a local place in Ankara, which is the Christian part within Erbil, where you get drinks very easily, and there are a lot of bars and cafes around. And we were sitting there, and I was connecting to expats and to Kurds. And when I was talking about the topic, which intrigued me, and then when this whole thing with ISIS came up, it was really easy to find people who wanted to talk about it. They were all interested in this issue, as was I, and I was still trying to just figure it out. I was just asking questions, which is also, this approach has guided my entire research. Even though I read already on Kurdistan and whatnot, I went in there, as I always say, with like a blank paper. I assumed that I know nothing and I cannot possibly know it. And I was trying to simply ask questions and try to understand it and re-ask the same questions over and over again, because people give you different answers. And I simply assume that I am collecting everything that I learn and know, and every time where there's something that I don't understand, I keep on digging there. So I always went with, every time there's something that my brain cannot process, I tend to think that this is a place where I reach the own limits of my own comprehensions, and this is where I'm getting intrigued, because I try to... People look at the world in different ways, and this is exactly where I find it interesting and worthwhile to dig into when your own perceptions are challenged. So I was going around and asking questions, and people were easily referring me to, oh, you should talk to that person, and oh, you should talk to this person, and this is how it all started. And I started interviewing a person here and there. It was also really easy to get to interviews. It was more difficult to explain to people that I'm a researcher, but it was super easy to do an interview because everybody simply assumed you're a journalist. And what you cannot forget is that the Kurdish region is not a state, but they would like to be to a certain extent, or they do demand their autonomy, they do demand their cultural rights, and that's true for all the Kurds in all the countries, so including Turkey, including Syria and Iran. I only dealt with the Kurdish region in Iraq, and there also they have the highest degree of autonomy at the moment. What was interesting is that people were super willing to talk with me because they also, anything that can get their stories out into the world, and particularly into the Western world, because they're hoping to get support through that, by information getting out, by the stories getting out. They hope that people will start to sympathize, to understand, to stand up for them. And this is why they were very willing to talk with me. And this is also how I ended up at the front line, because I simply talked to a few politicians, and then somebody I met again at a barbecue, they said, hey, my uncle is a brigadier general at the front line. Why don't you talk to the soldiers? And I was like, I would be very interested to talk to the soldiers. And so he arranged for me to meet his uncle, and he even arranged to drive me there himself. He even translated for me, because as the nephew, they have a strong trust relationship with the uncle, and his English was flawless. So it was really lovely to work with him, and this actually turned my entire research around, because once I talked to the soldiers, I realized that it's nice to talk to the politicians, but they will only tell you the story that they want you to hear. Soldiers tell you what's actually going on, and this is what I found more interesting and intriguing, which is why during my PhD I focused on soldiers exclusively.
So you went to the front line with soldiers. How close did you come to a gunfire exchange with ISIS?
Luckily, not close. They are very cautious on the security of Westerners. Again, because their interest is that positive things are known about the Kurdish region. They cannot risk to have a Westerner be endangered. So every time, plus I think it's not just this kind of strategic thought. I think that in general, Kurds are super hospitable. In all my travels, I've never met more hospitable people than the Kurds. They will take care of you as though you're a member of the family. And I think it's that when somebody says, okay, you come to my frontline section, or you are my guest, then it is my responsibility to make sure you're safe. So they only invited me. And I had several interviews which were postponed and pushed, because they were like, okay, we see some movement on the ISIS side. Let's not do the interview now. Let's not do it today. Or they said, it has been calm for a few days, for whatever reason, they judged it to be safe enough for me to come and to see. The only place where I've once came closer to a gun exchange was in the very, very south. It was around Jalola, which is a little bit north of Baghdad. So the Kurds already went quite far in terms of the territory they were already holding and defending against ISIS. But there you could really see it was still a mobile front line. So they did not dig in. I've seen front lines which had like 3 defensive lines along kilometers, and like huge buildup in terms of defensive walls. Like, it's incredible the amount of changes we can do to our environment if we need to, and how quickly this can be done. It's astonishing to me what war can move here. But like literally move mountains, to have huge defensive walls which are suddenly appearing in a flat surface. But there you had a little pile of sand here, a little mountain hut there. There was a water truck there, and that was it. Like, you barely saw where the front line was. And as we were approaching this area with the car, I was told that there's ISIS a little bit to the left of us, and there's ISIS a little bit to the right of us. And I realized that, okay, we're kind of in a V shape towards ISIS, and now let's hope that ISIS doesn't know that, because if I'm ISIS, then the thing I would do is I would cut them off, so encircle them, and ciao bella. But this is why I was quite uneasy at this front line. And when we had the interview, I can't recall if it was really during the interview or if it was already in the part where we were kind of chatting afterwards. But it started to have there was gunfire exchange, and they were telling me that you can relax. This is normal. It's not friendly fire, but it's casual. We keep shooting back and forth. That's what we do, kind of. And I was simply like, I'm sorry, but even a stray bullet can kill, so I don't care. I saw that this front line was very unstable, and to me that was not worth the risk. And there I really said, I'm sorry, I do not feel well. I want to stop this conversation here, and I want to return right now. And this is what we did. They really respected my wish there fully, and this is the closest I got to gun exchange in that
so
sense.
You described it with the word, it went a bit uneasy. My question would be a bit more direct, saying like, were you afraid, and how do you experience fear there? Like what does it do if you know that like they can now circle you and that's it?
Well, I didn't know that they could circle us. It was my hypothesis. How did I experience fear? I experienced several types of fear, I have to say. I experienced a fear which reminded me of the fear of a traveler anywhere. I had the same fear when I was dropped off by the taxi driver in New York the first day of my world journey, and he dropped me off in the wrong block, and it was like midnight and it was dark and it was close to the Bronx, and I was like, what the hell, you know? I had a similar fear then, so it was very tense. I was very scared. I was very, I was checking everywhere. I was looking at everybody. I was super tense and hectic, but I still tried to portray an image as though I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly where I'm going, in order to put people off, to don't even give them an incentive to try and anything, you know, don't even say hello to me. It's not worth it, kind of. That's the vibe I was giving off. And I had some of these moments in Kurdistan as well, although very few within the Kurdish cities. But at the very beginning, I did find it fearful, for example, that people just wear guns in the area. I'm not used to this, coming from Austria, obviously. And there it's very common that everybody just has a gun, and sometimes just flung over their shoulder. And I found it really interesting to conceptualize for myself afterwards how much we trust the uniform. So if we see a person in uniform standing somewhere with a gun over their shoulder, we're like, okay, that's a professional, kind of. But if you see a civilian in civilian clothing with an AK-47 over their shoulder, you're like, what the hell, what the hell, what the hell? You know, he's just getting coffee, casually having his AK-47 over the shoulder, and you're like, and weirdly, I trust the person in the uniform not to shoot me in the back, but with that person, he just could, right? Technically, the person in the uniform could too, but there I trust the fact that the uniform protects me, because he cannot just shoot for nothing, while the other one is the civilian. So it was just interesting for me to have this, to see my own reaction, how much I trusted a person with a gun in uniform and how much I distrusted a person with a gun who was a civilian. This was one type of fear that I experienced. The other type of fear was with the gun exchange, where I simply said, there was not a question for me that I wanted to leave, because, as I said, I don't care if this is just a casual exchange of gunfire, because a casual bullet kills as well. And to me, that I was just determined then, actually. I was just jumping into action. My fear immediately made me react, and there was no discussion about what's going to happen next. I get into the car and we drive. Basta. The most intense fear that I have to say that I experienced, and that was really interesting for me as an experience, was when we were driving along areas where they had minefields. That was the worst, in the sense that the enemy is invisible. There is a huge difference whether you're on a front line and you are hiding behind some, piles of sand and like maybe even a wall made out of bricks where you have this little hole where you can look through, and you're like kind of peeking over, and you're just, but the chances that you see what's happening on the other line. And of course, if somebody jumps up and shoots, I barely have time to react to it probably. But the fact that you're looking at it, and it gives you some kind of feeling of control over the situation. While when you're in an area, and in this particular case, we were driving in a place which ISIS had been holding for several months. And every time ISIS is pushed out of a town, and this was the particularly brutal thing that ISIS did, in addition to all the things we saw in the media, is that every time they left a place, they actually put IEDs, so improvised explosive devices, everywhere. So they'd put little bombs anywhere and everywhere they could, and they wanted to. It could be doorbells, could be like the teapot on the stove, you lift it and boom, you know. And it was a way to destroy even those who were simply returning to their homes, and it was a way to get the enemy even after they were no longer there physically themselves. And there we were driving in this town which had just been liberated by ISIS, I think 2 or 3 days before that. And as we were driving along, I was traveling with 2 journalists at the time. Then I joined them on their trip actually to this particular section, which was in the very north. And we were driving into a road, and suddenly we saw an Asaish car. The Asaish are the internal security, so they're kind of like the intelligence forces in a way in Kurdistan. And they drove up to us, and they were gesturing that we should stop driving. And so the driver stopped, and they started to communicate in Kurdish with each other. And it turned out that we were driving in a street which they hadn't cleared of the mines yet. So it's possible that, I mean, obviously so far we didn't hit anything because we were still there, but we had to drive back trying to stay within the tracks of the wheels, where we drove in. We couldn't just back out. And so it was minutes, which felt like hours, in this car looking out, because we weren't allowed to step out either, because there could be something right next to the car, right? So we had to sit in the car and trust the driver to actually hit the exact, and the Asaish were really guiding him every millimeter, trying to see that we would stick within the same lines that we had been driving in. And this is a type of fear that it's a stone cold fear which makes you immovable, and it's like you're not breathing for this entire time because you don't know. You know, as soon as you hear anything or see anything, it's already too late. You can't react anymore. And that's the thing where the fear makes you ice cold and immovable, because you can't. And this is the most horrible type of it. With everything else, you feel like you can react. You have some kind of ability to do something. But there,
nothing.
You just wait, yeah, and hope.
You know, when I traveled, for example, Asia, and I remember every time I came back to Europe, I was stunned by the cleanness, like you could eat from a toilet here. And in Asia, I remember how dirty it sometimes was, all the smells, or everything was different. And the first weeks after I came back from a longer trip, it still had an impact on me. When you had such moments of fear that I have never experienced until now, and you talk to soldiers, you really see the impact what this war does to a whole culture and families and people you get close with. What did it change in you that you see that there is still an impact now, even it's some years ago?
Oh, that's a lot. What intrigued me the most is when I came back, I realized that war is oddly normal and peace feels more weird than war, which is very weird. It's utterly weird. But the thing is, I never experienced any sort of culture shock when I went to Kurdistan. Not the first time, not the second time, not any time that I went. It has to do with the fact that I connected to people so quickly. It also has to do with like being received so warmly and openly by the hospitality. But it also has to do with the fact that when you go somewhere new, you're just on alert. You're on higher alert. You're open to everything because you need to remain flexible. The way to survive is to be super cautious beforehand, like to prepare yourself and actually confront yourself with all the different possibilities. Just to give one example, I did confront myself with the possibility of being kidnapped, and I tried to learn, and particularly in conversation with international soldiers, so British, French, American, who I met along the way as well. And I talked to them and I asked them, what do you do? What do I have to do when I'm kidnapped? And we went through all the gore details of it. Like, what is the best reaction? What are they trained to do? What gives you the best chances of survival? And I confronted myself with that, because I knew that I don't know if I would, and thankfully I never had to try it out, but I don't know if that would have helped, but to me it helps to confront myself with it and to then not be overwhelmed with it. So it gives me some kind of, at least, a belief in the fact that there's something that I can control. There's something that I can do that can make it better or worse. And by knowing what is what, it helps. It's kind of like doing a first aid course for the car. No, when you get into an accident, you don't remember everything, but you know a 1, 2, 3 at least. You know the 1, 2, 3 actions, and as soon as you know your first action, you can think of the second and the third and the fourth. The important thing, and this is also what I learned from the soldiers, is to stay active. Don't freeze, exactly like in the freezing fear with the IEDs, with the minefield. When you freeze, you're immovable, then you're incapable of continuing. That's the dangerous fear. As long as you stay within the possibility of action, you're good. Even if you're really bad, you're still good in comparison. This is when you can survive. So stay within action. You need to stay moving.
Is this also something that you now do in your life? Like, take it as a metaphor, never stand still, always keep moving, even if there's no immediate danger?
That's interesting. I never thought about it like that. So my first reaction would be to say no. But where I recently found it again is in a saying that said, whenever you find yourself lost, just take the next right step. And I think this is where it connects really well. So whenever you're at a point where you're like, I don't know what to do, be it changing jobs or be it, like the next action in a project or whatever it is, like as soon as you find yourself overwhelmed, just take the next right step. That's it. Because it keeps you moving and you don't know at the end where your path will lead you. You just need to keep on taking steps. Just focus on the next one you can take.
You talked that you accompanied soldiers, and you always talk in the male form, and also in your PhD you wrote that there are female Peshmerga as well. But one question I have in particular, because I think I heard it once and I thought maybe you can answer me the question. I heard that for ISIS fighters the worst is to be killed by a female. You're already smiling. Is this true, or is this just a story they tell each other?
I'm guessing it's both, but I'm only guessing because I never concerned myself with those issues. I heard it. I also heard it in the region, not just in international media, and it's possible. I never talked to an ISIS fighter, so I don't know. I don't know if they're really afraid of that. I couldn't tell you, and I know too little about religion to be able, or about Islam to be able to answer that question. I don't know. There are female fighters. I also had the pleasure of meeting some, but yeah, the majority of the Kurdish fighters in Iraq is still male.
You write in your PhD that the merger of the forces split in the exact way as they were unified during political tension in 1991. So I have to refer again, this was the year that you were born.
Yeah.
I just need to look at my papers now. The structural unification during a merger is not enough, you explain. Short side note here, they wanted to unify to get international support. So what does it take to merge two militaries, or even ask broader, what does it take that two parties, companies or whatever, engage in a merger?
Well, I believe that, and again, my belief stems from looking at the Kurdish armed forces. During my master's, I talked to forces which were already unified. I talked to forces which were not unified. And I talked to internationals in addition. So I realized then that I saw several things along the front lines that are supposed to be unified, but they just didn't look it. I give you one example. In the Kurdish culture, whenever somebody important enters the room, people stand up. That's a huge deal in the culture. I was at a unified front line in 2014 when I was not even dealing yet with the topic of integrating the forces per se, but I was rather doing an analysis of the status quo on how they're cooperating on the front lines and what they do cooperate on and what they don't. And I was at a unified front line, and they invited me for lunch. And we met at a little hut, right, like a little bit behind the front line. And we sat there, and half of the room was sitting on one side of me, and with the commander right next to me. And there were already people on the other side, to my right wing as well. And then the commander of the other side entered, and only half the room stood up. His former military force, which is not unified, which is not under the government, but under the one political party, they stood up as a sign of respect. The others, who are soldiers who are former soldiers of the other political party, they stayed seated, which is a huge affront in terms of culture. And this was something where I was like, wow. I mean, so the reason why they were sitting together, at least this is my take on it, is because I was there and because they wanted to show the unified part. But I was really seriously wondering how often they do that when I'm not there, you know? This is the part where you, as a researcher, change the things you are observing just by being there yourself. And there were several aspects like that, which I saw along the different front lines. Every time I saw them unified, I saw official structures, but nobody was keeping with these structures. I saw another example. I saw a beautifully unified force where the deputy and the commander were really, really friends. You could really feel that. They were really cooperating well. And I was so hopeful after leaving this front line, because it was like, okay, it does work. They can come together just by putting them in the same unit and saying like, okay, you're friends now, collaborate. Yes, 20 years ago, you might have been shooting each other and everybody has a cousin or an uncle or somebody who was killed by somebody on the other side, but just deal with it, right? But then when I was driving back, one of the soldiers who was driving me started to ask me why I only interviewed commanders and not regular soldiers. Again, that was still during my master's degree, because during my PhD I did interview regular soldiers, which have no rank, nothing. I call them regular soldiers, so no non-rank soldiers. Because he then said he would also like to give me his opinion, and I was very open to it, and I immediately invited him to tell me whatever he wants to say. And I also told him, as I tell all the others, that it's an anonymous conversation, because I do understand that a lot of these things are still very sensitive. Criticizing political parties, criticizing commanders, and so forth. It's really sensitive to even their personal security and life in parts. And he was telling me that the only reason why he follows the deputy is because the commander asked him to. But he does not regard the deputy in any form as his superior. He does not care about any of his commands. And the only reason why he does so is because the one he follows and he's loyal to asks him to. That's why he does. But he's firmly convinced that the enemy, the true enemy, is not in front of them, like ISIS, but is next to him in the trench. It's the one who's on his left or right shoulder. And to see this divide among even unified leadership was really astonishing to me. And this is where I started to get the impression, and this is what I dedicated my PhD to, is, okay, if the structure is not enough, if it's not enough to simply create a uniform organigram, a uniform ministry, if it's not enough to simply say like, okay, you and you, now you work together, then what does it need? And I found that culture is a huge part here. And culture is something which, yes, if you just create a structure, or if you just put people together, culture creates itself. It's there by how people interact with each other. It's there in how they regard each other. It has a lot to do with the individual mindsets, but culture is a little bit more than just that. It's about how the whole dynamic evolves. And that's then the culture. But you can also impact this culture. You can impact it with your own mindset and with your own way of acting, reacting, and interacting with others. You can affect it by setting certain values, by refocusing yourself on what is important and why do we do what we do and how do we want to do it in the first place. By shifting these mindsets, by enabling a transformation which goes beyond just the changing of the structures, but rather the transforming of hearts and minds, this is where you can actually affect something. And this is what you see in the economic literature on change, and this is what you see and this is what I transfer to the military as well. And I firmly believe that there is the possibility to bring them together, but you cannot just say, now you have a new structure, now you two, Department 1 and Department 2, you are now one common department, go deal with it.
The example that you gave from this, he was not a soldier, he was a commander, or the one that said the enemy is not in front of us. But
no, he was a regular soldier.
A regular soldier. Because when you gave me this example, I was thinking about daily work. And when
Absolutely.
you refer now to economics, you write that to unify two parties, it needs real leadership, understanding of the other party, and compromises. Mm-hmm. So I was immediately thinking about mediation.
Absolutely.
And you work now in a business where you try to influence culture, where you do change management, and I guess also this had an impact on you as a private person. So what were the most learnings from this research you did that you now can build into your business life or your private life as soon as there's a conflict, for example?
Many things. Many things I learned from my PhD that I can now use. What I realized after writing the PhD is that I'm really curious to put all this theory into, to test it on real life. And one way of doing that is to do it with the military forces. And another way is to actually shift back, since I shift back from the military forces to the economic sector. And I just think that there are more opportunities to induce change and deep transformation within the economic field than within the military field. So right now I have the pleasure of working with a consultancy which really looks way beyond the structure. And I see this in everything that we do, because we also truly believe that structure alone is not enough. Whether you're talking about digitalizing something, whether you're talking about making your team more agile, whether you talk about any form of change you talk about, you need more than just saying now we do that and now we create this structure and I take this from this book, I copy paste it here, let's figure this out. You need to get people on board. You need to listen to them. You need to involve them in a lot of the, not necessarily the decision making, but at least in the figuring out what are the current values, what are the current issues, what is there, what do they see, what do they feel, what are their needs. And then you transfer that. And whether this is in a conflict scenario or in a normal change situation, you need to know what are the needs of the people involved in this. At the end of the day, we tend to believe that organizations are a simple matter of building Lego, I guess. We just put it together and we believe that, this is the building. The building is the organization. The structure is the organization. No, it's the people. It's the people who make the organization. It's the people who create the culture. It's the people who create what the business is by the way they act and react and interact every day. And this is why in anything that I do now as well, I look at the culture, I look at the people. It's really about, as we also say at 51, it's as soon as you start doing something different, just yourself, you're already inducing change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But one thing that I learned sometimes even on the hard way, that it's nice said and done, but sometimes you really need a tense situation or a conflict that people feel moved to do something and to change something.
Sure.
And as you were working in these tense situation, I was wondering if you see it a bit similar, that some things are nice said and done, but you need a conflict or a crisis, and then people start moving.
It's a little bit of both, in the sense that conflict makes things possible that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. As I said, with the front lines, where they moved mountains, where they built huge structures within days as defensive lines. The same thing is true. Think of the corona crisis, it's the same thing. Suddenly, we've been talking about home office and digitalization and remote working and asynchronized work efforts. We've been talking about this forever, and who has actually done it? Which big organization has actually really implemented that? Maybe they have made it possible for some single mothers to take home office once a week. Congratulations. That's not what we're talking about in terms of what digital leadership can do, what agile work can do, what is possible if we're integrating, really digitalizing not just our tool set, but our mindset. If we think differently, if we start to evaluate work differently, if we're not talking about working time, but the output of your work efforts. Sure, it's not possible with everything, but it's possible with a lot of jobs that we do nowadays, and particularly in the modern way of working. And here, conflict or a crisis situation like Corona makes things possible. Because it forces you to do some things, and it forces you to make quicker decisions, because otherwise, you perish. But, and this is the thing that I also learned at war, if the conflict or the crisis is too strong or too long, it also inhibits you. And again, you can transfer this to Corona in a certain way, in the sense that living with this insecurity that we don't know if there is an economic crisis approaching us, if there will be a second wave and how much that is going to impact us, makes us immovable, in the sense that companies are not daring to really spend money on anything, neither on internal strategy work nor on building a new product. They're cautious, which is understandable, which is super understandable, but this hinders you also. This makes you immovable again. And this is the same thing at war. I also saw that a lot of the reform projects which they had were postponed and postponed and postponed, because there were bigger fish to fry. Because there's always something in a hot conflict or in a level of high insecurity where you're cautious with your budget, where you're cautious with what's the next step. And this caution, again, makes you slower. So yes, at the beginning, it gives you a huge push to transform quicker. But then at the end, it also can pause you and make you slower again, which can even be much longer than the phase of initial change.
You already brought up the topic of needs. And I once did some seminars with a well-known German psychotherapist. His name is Gunther Schmidt, and I liked his definition about conflicts, because he said that a conflict occurs if one of my needs is in danger of not being fulfilled because of the needs of somebody else. And this alone for him makes a conflict. I'm just thinking about it since coming back from Kurdistan and reflecting so much about it, and also reflecting on it on a research level, how much are you aware of your own needs?
Well, luckily, I also get to be involved with the question of conflict within 51, and because of the internal culture we have, which really encourages constant learning and self-development, I get to confront myself a lot with that through certain training programs or, which bring that back into my mind, or just through literature or people that I meet and talk to. So I'm quite fortunate to confront myself with this rather often. But at the same time, I realize every time I do it explicitly, not just implicitly, as in I realize something as I go along, but rather if I do it explicitly, that I sit down and I really take time to reflect on this and to be mindful of myself, I realize that I could do it much more often still. So I find that needs is something where you have a general pattern, I would say, which stays quite true and stable for a longer period of time. But then you also have rather midterm and short-term needs, which are more flexible and they change. And needs can even change within a day, you know. And in the morning you feel like I need to get out, I need to get involved, I need to be with people, and I have this strong need of interacting and you know, being out there. And in the evening you're like, I can't see another person, you know, like that. It can happen that needs also change quite quickly. But then I also find that, so I would personally differentiate between short-term, midterm and long-term needs.
When you went to Kurdistan, I guess your mother had the need and your friends that you stay safe. How many times did they tell you, please don't do it, come back, stay safe? Like, what did they tell you?
They told me, stay safe. They told me, please come back. They told me, please take care of yourself. But they never told me, please don't do it. Which I think in particular, in regard to my mother, was a huge strength of hers. And of my father. Same thing. I would even include my brother here. Like, honestly, this is a huge strength to let your daughter, sister, just do it, and to trust in her ability to listen to it. My mother and I, we talked a lot about it afterwards, and it was really funny for me because I was really trying to calm her down in any way I considered possible, namely by sharing with her all the information that I thought about, everything that I had considered, an exit plan of how I could, you know, if ISIS were to run into Erbil, how I would get into the mountains and how I could survive and how I would have enough water and how I have a grab bag with me and how I have a route in mind of how I can get there and how I'm heading to Turkey. And like everything I was telling her didn't make her more calm. And at the end of it, at one point, I was asked a question by a third person, with my mother in presence though. I was asked the same question you asked me today, weren't you afraid? And I said, of course I was. I never thought it was necessary to say that because it's so obvious that obviously I was afraid as well. But somehow this sentence made my mother relax. The part that relaxed her was that she realized that I was fearful, meaning there's a part in me which would also stop me from not going too far. And this is the one thing I didn't tell her before because I thought it was so obvious that obviously I trust my intuition. Obviously I feel fear. I feel fear when I look down a street which is dark and alone, and I'm walking alone by myself. Don't even need to be in Kurdistan for that. That happens in Vienna, you know? Like, I have fear. And fear makes me cautious and attentive and alert. And when she heard that, this is when she was like, okay, that's good. Because then she knows that I will not go too far with it. This is what gave her the trust that it's all right.
You once said to me that as a young woman, you came to terms with the fact that there are states that consciously set themselves apart from others. And this has shaped you, and you wanted to deal with demarcation. Was your way to Sweden, where you studied, and your trip to the Middle East, therefore already pre-programmed in your youth?
That's a funny question. I don't believe in pre-programming, no. I firmly believe that at the end of your life, or at the end of a period of your life, it's quite easy to connect the storyline afterwards. Like, you have several dots along the way and you just connect it as though it is one straight line. But that's only the perspective from hindsight. Before, you don't know. That's just, in hindsight, it looks like a red thread, but I guess that's coincidence. I was concerned as a child with the question of, I grew up close to the German border, let's say it as it was, and to me this border is entirely odd. there is a house which is Austrian, next to it is a house which is Germany, and I was like, and how are those two different? I didn't get it. In addition, my parents are both from Upper Austria, and I was born in Tyrol, and yet Tyrolians told me all my life, you're not from here, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? We both have an Austrian passport. Shouldn't be that the thing that matters? But it doesn't. And this is something that I've pretty much come to terms with by now, thank God, but which has concerned me for a long time of my life, and still does in a way, because I still find the issue in itself, the issue of identity, is deeply intriguing, and particularly how it's connected to language and to location, to dialect in particular in Austria. And I just find this, as I said, intriguing. And back then, obviously, I didn't choose these words, but I really wanted to know who decided that here is Austria and here is Germany. And I wouldn't say that some states do that and some don't. Everybody does that, and everybody tries to do it. And some try to defend the borders that they have. Some try to regain borders that they used to have. Some try to gain entirely new borders or claim that the Kurds are an identity group, an ethnic group. And they're asking for a state since nationalism actually started to organize the world in the way we see it today. But in any case, my story has led me always to the question of borders, and I connected the question of borders to war. This is something that just, history classes at the gymnasium taught me, but it's also something which I keep bumping into. There's something in conflict that makes borders. And of course you can say there's also diplomacy which deals with, transfer of parts of the land. Sure, but you have to have some claim to the land in the first place, and the claim comes from brute force. So at the end of the day, to me, borders are connected to conflict and war. And but the issue of identity isn't really, at least not necessarily. And here I find this triangle extremely interesting, and I've been concerned with this all my life. This is why I studied political science, because I wanted to understand the power and the power structures which make it possible for someone to decide that a huge majority of your male country, or like a huge part of the men in your country, are willing to go to possible death. And I wanted to know who has the power to decide that and why. And so I studied political science, and I then left Austria and went to Sweden to focus on the Middle East, because there you have a lot of conflicts and a lot of border issues, and a lot is still in movement and not quite as settled as it is in Europe. And then I found the military forces there by coincidence because of this issue with ISIS. And I worked with, I then finished my PhD at King's on defense studies, because to me at the end it looks like a red thread, as I said, but I guess that it was a coincidence all the way. I never planned to go to Sweden. I never planned to go to Kurdistan or Iraq or anything the like,
I think I already understand that you don't need to plan things.
I do. I love planning. Ask my husband. I really like. I like the illusion of being in control, and I know it's an illusion, but I like it. But at the same time, you need to adapt to what happens in life, and you need to go with kind of where life puts you sometimes. Just say yes to opportunities in a way, I guess.
When you said borders remind you of war, for me, borders remind me of exclusion, or of the illusion of belonging. So you grew up in Tyrol, I grew up in Bavaria, and there we were really proud, and we always were finger pointing at the rest of Germany because we are the good ones. And when you said your both parents are coming from Upper Austria, you grew up in Tyrol, they already said to you, who are you? Like, you're not really belonging. Did you in your youth ever had times where you felt like you get excluded or you don't belong to this group?
Constantly.
Did this shape you in a way that this made it a topic that you want to research on, and then it ended, okay, then from hindsight, of course, it's a red thread for me again. But okay, even from hindsight, if I ask you this question now, do you see that I see a red thread?
Of course, and I see a red thread myself. I still don't think it was pre-programmed, but yes, the question of not being accepted as a Tyrolean and as being challenged that I'm from here, or that I'm supposed to have some legitimization to be here in the first place. It has concerned me with questions of inclusion and exclusion, and it has concerned me, it has made me concerned with, I guess at the end with borders. And somehow through borders I came to politics, power, and the armed forces. At the end of the day, brute force has a lot of impact.
And then how to unify them again.
And that's just the thing. I was asked sometimes why I didn't study peace studies, and I said, to me the best comparison is medicine. Yes, there is also medical branch, or at least a new type of way of thinking, that you study the healthy patient in order to achieve the healthy patient. And in terms of medical research, I find this a really interesting thought. But the majority of research still looks at cancer and not at the healthy patient, because they want to understand what's the problem and what is it really and why is it there and how does it act and how do you dissolve it, rather than what's the healthy patient at the beginning, right? Or hopefully at the end. So to me, studying war is like studying cancer. I want to look at what's the issue, and what has always guided me and intrigued me is the nature of humans. And I don't believe that there's one nature of it at all. But the way of why we do what we do, and why we go to war, and why we organize ourselves in the way we do, and why we grow up to have the beliefs that we do, and all of that is something that has always intrigued me. And I guess war and conflict is just one of the most interesting cancers to study, and to figure out how to alleviate and how to take the things which are constructive, not about war but about conflict, the things that it moves, the things that it makes things possible, that it accelerates our development every time. Every crisis accelerates our development in some area. And how to channel that and use that without the destruction, without the horrors, without all the human loss and tragedy. And actually, that makes me think of this question you asked me before, of how when I came back to, because you talked about your own travels and when you came back to Austria and how you needed to readjust here as well. I had exactly that. This is where I said that for some odd reason, war feels oddly more normal than peace, because when I came back then it was Christmas time, and I remember standing at the Christmas market in Innsbruck and looking at the wooden figurines, which are beautifully crafted, like Christ figures and hearts and angels and all of it. And I was looking at it, and I honestly couldn't comprehend how somebody could spend so much time on crafting something like that when there are people dying. I couldn't get it. So the urgency, the adrenaline, the focus, the intensity of war was really something which stayed with me for a long time. In a similar way, I couldn't understand why my grandmother could spend so much energy on thinking about a neighbor's choice of curtain, for example, right? Or why, when I was in a cafe, there were two girls who talked for 2 hours, I guess, about prom dresses. And I was like, I really struggled with understanding the needs of peace and like the needs people have in peaceful times and the things they are concerned with, which are superficial at times and hard to grasp when you come from a place where you've met people who then died a few weeks later. And when you received several messages saying that this front line you just visited 2 days ago is under attack right now, and here's a picture of the building where you sat just a few, months earlier, and now it's completely in ruins. And yeah, this is where peace feels odd.
So in other words, it made you far more humble.
In a way, yes, as well. It really did. I had a time in my youth where I was really shy, but I learned to become extrovert and quite self-confident, and I liked the spotlight. And war has made me like it less, because I found it really difficult to find the right balance to talk about it without either going into the drama of it, because I also didn't want to make it a scene, I didn't want, because people also enjoy hearing the tragedies and they enjoy hearing these stories as well, but to me this is not respectful to the people that I talked with and the people that we lost along the way either. So I want to commemorate their lives and what they do and what they did in the most respectful way. And to me, this is not something which you just casually talk about. So it made me less chatty about everything, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, we are talking about war and death and all these tragedies. It's so exciting for us.
That's actually, it's a really interesting point you're making, because what I realized, and I think that I already knew that before I went to Kurdistan, but I definitely learned it while being there during the whole thing with ISIS, is we only know war from history books or from Hollywood films. And I hope this is going to stay that way. I hope it for all of us. But war, how I experienced it, and please, I met more people who have much more to do with war and who have seen more war than I have, international soldiers and some of my dear friends who have been at a lot of wars already in their lives. No war is ever the same. Even if you go to the same war twice, it will not be the same. So every war is different, but the one I experienced was much calmer and much more slowly than what I have thought it would be from history books and Hollywood movies. One of my favorite things I love doing is going to cinemas with soldiers and then looking at war movies and them telling me, like, no, that's unrealistic, and yeah, that's true, and no, that's completely bullshit.
What a thing to do. First you go to a barbecue to decide to go to the front line, and then you take soldiers to Hollywood movies about war.
No, to realize, to get a grasp on it, because a lot of the things that we hear are super dramatic. As I said before, we thrive in a way on this moment,
It's thrilling for so many of us because we never experience this immediate fear. And even when you tell the things, they touch us. You said we know war just from history books or because it's happening somewhere else.
Luckily so, yes.
When you said this, I was wondering, do you sometimes feel like a war zone?
Do I feel like a war zone?
Like internal conflict, because this big topic that we touched about conflicts and crises and stuff. And when you described that, you as a woman, you went to this country, you observed what happens there, you did a research, you come back and you actually live in a totally different surrounding where you don't experience immediate war. And then I was thinking, like, how many women are as fortunate as we are right now, but I'm still sometimes in a war zone with myself.
I would be very cautious to using the term of war, just because I've touched upon the intensity on it. I don't even want to say that I know. I really don't. I was lucky to get the cotton candy version of it. I was really softly patted the entire time, but I guess I was closer than many who live in Austria from day to day and have never been that close. So the most interesting thing for me is that after I came back from Kurdistan the first time, a friend of mine sent me a book which was titled How to Survive in a War Zone. My mother just sarcastically commented, as in, she sends you this afterwards. Thank you very much. But there was a lot of chapters in the book, a lot of them really useful. And I realized that a lot of it is stuff I learned from hiking in the mountains, the 101s on how to survive in nature. A lot of it is what I learned from traveling, the way of how you're cautious about things. I think the only thing I didn't know, and the only thing that was really new for me in this book was how to check your car for bombs. But I never had a car when I traveled, so it never concerned me in the first place. But good to know for future reference. But yeah, and then the third part is kind of first aid. This is also something. And I think with all of that, I was actually, when I read this book, I was really satisfied with how much I did quite well, So it was rather a checklist for me afterwards. It's like, okay, I did good. But then there was one chapter, and it was the last chapter in the book. And when I first read through the index, I was like, I don't need that chapter. It was called Trauma. And since I read the book from the beginning, I was in front of the last chapter, and I was like, I might as well finish the book, do the whole thing. And it turned out that the last chapter on trauma was the most useful in the entire book for me. On a scale from 0 to 10, I firmly believe that I have only touched on 0.5 max. Like, really, again, soft padded cotton candy version here. But several stories that war journalists report on in terms of trauma, I recognized for myself. I recognized the difficulty of dealing with peace. I recognized this weird sense that there's this path from the train station to go to my hometown, like to go to my parents' house. It's not quite 2 kilometers. And I have walked this road 1,000,000 times. I've commuted for 8 years to my school through that train station. Like, I know this road inside out. I've walked it at any time of day and night. And when I came back from Kurdistan and I walked it by myself at one point, I turned around every 20 steps, I guess. And I knew I was in Austria, and I knew I was all right, and I knew that there is nothing that's even potentially harmful here. But I couldn't help but keep turning. I couldn't help but keep trying to scan my environment. I couldn't shake this feeling of being not secure, even though my head knew that I was, but my body still felt the urge to. There was something there. There was a shadow of this tension that I had the entire time, kind of, while I was in an area which is insecure, where at any moment where you have a backpack in the corner and you have it with you when you go out, which is everything is in there. You have your money, your passport, your phone, mobile charger, water, some muesli bars. Like, you have your one-on-ones in there, and you get to you grab it. It's literally called a grab bag. You grab it and you run. And coming from this scenario with having even just this backpack in the corner of your eye all the time, it does something to you, and it affected me far more still afterwards. And this is the part which trauma covers, where there's a lot which happens. And yeah, I talked a lot to all different kinds of soldiers, some who even have PTSD officially, and what they experience. And
so this is why you wouldn't use the word war zone.
This is why I wouldn't use the word war zone, because I know war zone means more in sense of having internal conflict. That, yes, absolutely, and I think everybody has that.
What, you have internal conflict?
Of course. No, everybody does. Everybody does, and there are some which you can, use to grow in yourself, and you can deal with them by yourself. There are some where it really helps to have a partner, to have friends, to talk with others, to, whether you say it or not, to get help from others. And then there is the part of professional help, be that psychotherapy, be that body training, be that even yoga, like it can be anything that can help you to help heal wounds, to help figure out new directions, to help clean up the mess. Like there are many things that happen internally, obviously, and there's a lot of conflicts in yourself. Or as I sometimes say, like, as long as 7 out of the 10 voices in my head agree, I think I'm fine.
So we are coming to an end of our interview, but I want to end this interview with 3 questions.
3 more, okay.
3 more.
Hit
3
me.
more. I hit you. What is currently your biggest fear?
The first thing which comes to me now is that losing my husband. And I could enlarge it to losing my family, my mother, my father, my brother, my husband. Those are people who are very, very dear in my life. And it's not a fear that's there every day, but it's certainly the thing that could destabilize me the most. Yeah.
Can I just add something to the question? Is it this knowing of death that makes you afraid? Like knowing that there is an end and people could die?
No. What is more the source of fear for me is rather the dying quickly and unexpectedly. It's the surprise. It's that surprise, it's that shock. It's that not knowing, and ironically this is something that my mother raised us with every day, and we thought it was annoying as hell. Every day when we left for school, she asked, look into my eyes and say goodbye, every time. She wouldn't let us leave the house if it wasn't in a good word, ever. Even if we just had a fight, she demanded, look into my eye, I love you, now go. And this is the, I guess, a really big lesson is that this it's a fear to lose someone that you care about so much while having said something bad in the last moment, or not remembering even how you left it last time, and just this suddenness of it. That's I guess where the fear comes from. When you die at old age, it's still it's heartaching and it's painful, and you will grieve and it's a loss. But I guess that's okay in a sense. But the suddenness of it, the unexpectedness of it, that I'm fearful of.
So what are you currently doing where you don't know how it will turn out?
I guess everything. Actually, the more I think about it, it's everything. Who knows how anything is going to turn out? We never do. Any small action I do in my job, I don't know how it will turn out. I know what my intentions are. I know what I strive for. I know how I get engaged with it. Same thing in the relationship. Same thing in anything. Anything you do, you don't know how it will turn out. And I guess the challenge is to learn to live with this insecurity, which is just always there.
This is a very nice transition to the last question. I started to write my most favorite quotes in this tiny book here. And I will just go through the pages and you will say stop at a certain moment and then you will comment on this quote.
Damn, okay.
Okay, so we start now.
Stop.
Do you want to go left or right?
Left.
And then do you want to go top, middle or bottom?
Middle.
Okay. It's a quote from Paulo Coelho. Stress, anxiety, and depression are caused when we are living to please others.
Oh, I love it. I couldn't agree more in the sense that you have to live your own, I don't want to say truth, but your own fire, your own passion, your own person, your own soul. You have to go with what feels good for you. And when you bend yourself too much for others, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends in anxiety or depression. And stress, definitely. At the same time, I also find that this is not a black and white issue either. If you only do your thing, where's the border to egoism? And I find this thing to be very fluid on a day-to-day situation. To arrange yourself with others, with your environment, be that personal or professional, where you adapt, where you sometimes give in, where you simply let it go, where you sometimes do something for somebody else. And there's a lot of power and beauty and love and connection in doing that. But if you only do that, you lose yourself. And I can definitely say that to me, finding this balance between egoism and losing myself is something I'm concerned with every day. In my relationship, in my relationships, in my professional work, it's something that guides me as a person, and where I am constantly, and it's like I'm tiptoeing in the blind, in the complete dark. I'm blind about it. I don't know what is good in which situation all the time. So I'm tiptoeing carefully between, can I give in now? Or do I feel like if I give this in, I'm losing myself? Like, where's the boundary between I live my own self and I address my own needs? To come back to Gunther Schmidt as well. And I address my own needs and I stand up for myself, and I live who I am to the fullest, versus I also need to respect and regard the borders of others and the needs of others. So while I would agree on the sentence, at the same time I say that it's not just that black and white. That's just one side of the coin.
Thanks for this amazing ending, for wrapping up with boundaries and needs.
Didn't plan to do it, but thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
If you want to support this podcast, please subscribe and share.